folks have done is almost defies imagination. And you not only did it, but you hung on to it.
Community leaders are marking a grim anniversary of the deadly Flight 3407 crash by holding a rededication ceremony at the memorial at the Clarence Library. It's been a decade since the Continental flight fell from the sky into a house in Clarence Center, killing 50 people.
And as News 4's Chris Horvitz tells us, those 50 victims and their families have built quite a legacy.
Someone said it seems like it happened last week and it seems like it happened forever ago.
John and Marilyn Kausner are among those who have accomplished a lot in the last decade. Their daughter Ellie was on Flight 3407.
She was a lot of fun, and I always said Ellie lived her life like she knew she only had a short time on Earth.
She was beautiful, brilliant, and hilarious, and you would have loved her. So I say that to everybody. Look at her pictures, that's easy. I know I'm a biased dad, but
After the crash, the Kausners became members of an exclusive group nobody wanted to be in, Families of Flight 3407. And knowing this 10th anniversary has been approaching, John got to work on a little project. He started calculating all the money that has been raised in the victims' names.
I looked again, it's over $1 million, and I've only done about 10 family members so far. So that I can identify, there's over $1 million in scholarships and just outright gifts to people in need in our community.
Jean Cernaz is just one example. Her fiance, Paul Jean-Maire, who was supposed to marry her in the summer of 2009, told me how.
She and her daughter sponsored students in this Haitian high school. And the reason they did this is because you cannot get money into Haiti without having most of it siphoned off. And so that has continued.
How many students do you think she's impacted through that?
I have no idea, probably 100 a year or something like that.
The families have fought for change. They earned a major victory 17 months after the crash when the Airline Safety Act of 2010 passed in Washington. Congressman Brian Higgins was among members of Western New York's local delegation who pushed for it.
When you look at your tenure in Congress, is this the one? Is this maybe your
sure.
legacy? I don't know if that's the right word to use.
No, it's really not mine because truly it was a collective effort. All of them, they lost loved ones, but they wanted to ensure that the future flying public would be safe.
The act included several measures that would do just that, but the families highlight one. Both pilots and first officers on commercial flights are now required to have 1,500 hours of experience under their belts. When Flight 3407 went down, first officers were only required to have 250 hours. After that, there were no deaths on a U.S. airliner until 2018, when an engine exploded midair on a Southwest Airlines flight, killing one woman. The basis of the Airline Safety Act was the National Transportation Safety Board's report on Flight 3407.
The probable cause was pilot error. The interesting thing in all of this, the families never blame the pilots. They blame the system that allowed the pilots to go into the cockpit with inferior training.
Do you feel any ill will toward Mr. Renzullo?
No, I don't. I have never felt that.
Karen Walensky lived in that Clarence Center home and miraculously survived when the plane crashed. Her husband, Doug, did not.
Yeah, they should have been trained better and, they should have been more aware, but, they didn't want to die that night either, and it was an accident.
Walensky is now a more active member of Families of Flight 3407, fighting to keep Doug's legacy alive. But it wasn't always that way.
I was not really involved with them in the beginning of the process and, was not there when the bill was passed. But, here's a bunch of, ordinary people who really accomplished something pretty extraordinary.
Do you regret that?
I had a lot of guilt about that. It was the 4th anniversary that I actually did go to D.C. with them. And it was an eye-opener. In my naive mind, I thought, okay, a bill passes, it's, enforced, but that's not the way it works.
What she's learned, along with the other family members, is that they can't keep their guard down. Each time the Federal Aviation Administration comes up for reauthorization in Congress, they have to travel back to D.C. and lobby to keep the protections they fought for. And they keep doing it.
to fly in and out of D.C. just to take that flight, just leave on Wednesday night, walk all day Thursday, and hop a plane home Thursday, is physically taxing. So there's been a physical component. There's been an emotional, spiritual, whatever component that it's extremely frustrating to have to fight for 10 years. Obviously, there's the financial component, which costs a lot of money to go back and forth there 100 times.
Is there anything that surprises you or strikes you as you look back?
Yeah, the resistance to change. Resistance to change I didn't anticipate, to be truthful.
Higgins says that resistance has come from the airline industry looking to water down regulations. The current FAA Reauthorization Act runs into the year 2023, so in theory, those regulations are safe until then, barring any action by the FAA's administrator.
You can't walk away at this point. We have invested so much time and money and emotion, and we know what's at stake. And I mean, I feel like you can't walk away anymore.
Now, I wanted to go to Washington and interview the FAA's acting administrator to get him to say on camera whether or not he'd consider rolling back some of the regulations 3407 families have fought for. I first reached out to his office in October, and in 4 months, they couldn't find a time for me to sit down with him. However, Dave and Jackie, a spokesperson for the agency, did commend the families for the progress that they've helped achieve over the last 10 years.
It says a lot that he couldn't find time to sit down with
was
you.
disappointed in that.
And when it comes to that recognition, obviously a lot of local recognition. They've been on Capitol Hill for a decade. What about national recognition for these families?
I think that's there. We saw earlier today Sully Sullenberger, who piloted the Miracle on the Hudson flight, which, by the way, people forget that happened just weeks, so less than a month before the 3407 flight. But he tweeted out just a few hours ago that we, the flying public, owe these families a debt of gratitude for the fight that they've put up over the past decade. So certainly the industry and the players in the industry recognize what they've done.
I'm glad you showed how difficult it is to get something like this done. We've reported on it for 10 years, but to see what they've gone through is just amazing.
Lost loved ones, spent their own money,
Right.
spent their own time.
Absolutely.
Difficult to do.
Thank you, Chris.